The tiny house sat on a quiet suburban street, its white picket fence framing a yard dotted with patches of dandelions. Inside, the home was a whirlwind of change and chaos. Emily and Jack, a young couple who had spent years dreaming of building a family, had stepped into a reality that was both beautiful and overwhelming. The house was no longer just theirs. It was filled with the sounds of new life, some joyous, some heart-wrenching. Emily had always wanted a dog. For years, she would point out puppies to Jack on their evening walks, her eyes lighting up at the sight of wagging tails and floppy ears. So when they discovered she was pregnant, Jack surprised her with Max, a golden retriever pup. "Every child needs a dog," he'd said, his grin wide as Emily gasped at the tiny ball of fluff in his arms. The timing was perfect, or so it seemed. Max brought energy and warmth to their home, bounding through the rooms with clumsy paws and endless enthusiasm. But life quickly became a blur of feedings, late-night diaper changes, and sleepless nights. Between caring for a newborn and trying to keep Max from chewing on furniture, Emily and Jack barely had a moment to breathe. 3 months passed, and joy gave way to worry. At first, it was subtle. Lily, their baby girl, seemed quieter than most infants. She didn't kick her legs as much or squirm with the vigor Emily had seen in other babies. Then came the doctor's visits, the hushed conversations, and the tests. The diagnosis hit like a thunderclap. Infant paralysis, a rare condition that left Lily unable to move from the chest down. Emily felt like the air had been sucked out of her lungs. She stared at the doctor, trying to absorb the words, but they felt unreal. Jack gripped her hand tightly, his face pale. That night, they sat on the couch in silence, the weight of the news pressing down on them like a heavy blanket. Lily lay in her bassinet nearby, her tiny chest rising and falling as she slept. Max sat at their feet, sensing the tension in the room, his brown eyes wide with concern. "I thought this was supposed to be the happiest time of our lives," Emily whispered, her voice trembling. Jack didn't answer right away. He reached down, stroking Max's soft fur. "We'll get through this," he said finally, though his voice lacked conviction. The days that followed were a mix of determination and despair. Emily threw herself into researching treatments, therapies, and anything that might help Lily. Jack returned to work, trying to hold things together financially, but the strain was evident. Their once lighthearted conversations turned into hurried updates or arguments over who was more exhausted. Through it all, Max remained a constant. Despite being a puppy, he seemed to have an uncanny awareness of the household's mood. When Emily cried, he would sit beside her, resting his head on her lap. When Jack came home, Max greeted him with wagging enthusiasm, trying to coax a smile. But Max's energy often clashed with the delicate balance Emily was trying to maintain. His playful barks startled Lily, and his boundless curiosity led to messes that Emily didn't have the energy to clean up. One evening, Emily sat in the nursery, cradling Lily. The baby had been fussy all day, her cries piercing and insistent. Emily rocked her gently, humming a lullaby, but nothing seemed to work. Tears welled up in her eyes as frustration and helplessness overwhelmed her. Max trotted into the room, his tail wagging. He looked up at Emily with his usual bright-eyed expression, a toy dangling from his mouth. Emily groaned, her patience snapping. "Not now, Max," she snapped, her voice harsher than she intended. Max froze, the toy dropping to the floor. His tail stopped wagging, and he backed away, his ears drooping. Emily immediately felt a pang of guilt, but she was too drained to apologize. Max lingered in the doorway for a moment before slinking away. Emily returned her focus to Lily, whispering apologies to her daughter as fresh tears slid down her cheeks. Later that night, Emily lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. Jack was asleep beside her, his breathing deep and steady. She couldn't stop thinking about Max's reaction earlier. He had only been trying to play, to lighten the mood in his own way. Instead, she had pushed him away. The next morning, Emily found Max curled up on the rug in the nursery, his body pressed close to Lily's crib. She paused in the doorway, her heart softening. Despite everything, Max hadn't given up on trying to help. He had found his own way of supporting her and Lily, even if it wasn't always convenient. Emily knelt beside him, running her hand through his soft fur. "I'm sorry, buddy," she whispered. Max lifted his head, his eyes meeting hers with an expression that seemed to say he understood. From that moment, Emily decided to give Max more credit. He wasn't just a hyperactive puppy. He was part of their family, a family that needed all the love and support it could get. Little did she know, Max's role in their lives was just beginning. The stillness of the night was deceptive. Outside, the world slept peacefully under the dim glow of the moon. But inside the small house, the nursery was alive with the tension of another sleepless night. Emily sat slumped in the rocking chair, her body sagging with exhaustion. She rocked back and forth, humming softly to Lily, who had been crying on and off for hours. The baby's cries were quieter now, reduced to tired whimpers, but her little body remained restless, squirming in her mother's arms as if searching for something Emily couldn't give her. Emily's eyes burned from lack of sleep. She had spent hours pacing the room, singing lullabies and trying everything she could think of to soothe her daughter. Nothing worked. Lily's paralysis left her unable to move her legs or respond to comforting gestures the way most babies would. Her cries were a reminder of that, piercing through the silence like tiny arrows aimed directly at Emily's heart. She glanced at the clock on the wall. It was past 2 a.m. Jack had offered to take the night shift, but Emily had insisted. He needed his rest. He had work in the morning, and she had already seen how tired he looked after weeks of sleepless nights. Still, as much as she wanted to shoulder the burden, she felt the weight of it pressing down on her, suffocating her. Lily stirred in her arms, her little fists clenching as she whimpered again. Emily leaned down to kiss her daughter's forehead, her lips brushing against her soft skin. "Just sweetheart," she murmured. "Mommy's here. It's okay." Her voice cracked on the last word, betraying the tears she was holding back. At that moment, there was a soft creak from the hallway. Emily looked up to see Max, their golden retriever puppy, poking his head into the room. His tail wagged tentatively, as if he wasn't sure if he was welcome. His large brown eyes met Emily's, and she sighed. Max had a knack for appearing at the most inconvenient times, but tonight, she didn't have the energy to shoo him away. "Not now, Max," she said softly, though her tone lacked any real conviction. Max didn't move. He stood in the doorway, watching her with a mixture of curiosity and concern. His tail wagged again, slower this time, as if he were trying to gauge her mood. After a moment, he stepped into the room, his paws making barely a sound on the carpet. He approached cautiously, his eyes flicking between Emily and Lily. "Max, please," Emily said, a little more firmly. She didn't want him disturbing Lily. The last thing she needed was for the baby to start crying again just when she was beginning to settle. But Max didn't seem to care about her protests. He patted closer, his nose twitching as he sniffed the air around Lily. Emily watched him, her irritation giving way to curiosity. Max had always been a playful, high-energy puppy, bounding through the house with endless enthusiasm. But tonight he seemed different. His usual exuberance was gone, replaced by a calm, almost purposeful demeanor. He stopped just short of the rocking chair, his gaze fixed on Lily. "What is it, boy?" Emily asked, her voice softening despite herself. Max tilted his head, his ears twitching. Then, to her surprise, he reached up with one paw and rested it gently on the edge of the chair. Emily blinked, startled by the gesture. Max had never been particularly gentle. He was more likely to jump on the furniture or knock over a lamp than to approach with such care. But now, he stood perfectly still, his paw resting lightly on the chair as if asking for permission. Emily hesitated. She didn't want to encourage him to get too close to Lily, but something about his behavior gave her pause. It was almost as if he understood the gravity of the situation, as if he knew that this moment required a level of sensitivity beyond his usual puppy instincts. "Okay," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "But be gentle." Max seemed to understand. He moved closer, his movements slow and deliberate. When he reached the rocking chair, he stretched his neck forward and gently nuzzled Lily's blanket-covered foot. Emily tensed, watching for any sign of distress from the baby. But to her surprise, Lily didn't cry. Instead, she let out a small sigh, her body relaxing slightly against Emily's chest. Emily stared, her breath catching in her throat. Max continued to nuzzle the blanket, his warm breath brushing against Lily's tiny toes. His tail wagged once, a slow, deliberate motion, as if to say, "I've got this." For a moment, Emily didn't know what to do. She had spent so many nights trying to calm Lily, trying to find the right combination of soothing words and gentle rocking to help her daughter sleep. And now, here was Max, a rambunctious puppy, managing to do in seconds what she hadn't been able to achieve all night. As she watched, Max lay down on the floor beside the rocking chair. He curled his body into a tight ball, his head resting on his paws, but his eyes never left Lily. His gaze was steady, almost protective, as if he were standing guard over her. Emily felt a lump rise in her throat. She had always known that Max was a sweet dog, but she hadn't realized how deeply he seemed to care about Lily. Lily stirred again, her little hand twitching beneath the blanket. Emily froze, watching as her daughter's fingers flexed ever so slightly. It was a small movement, almost imperceptible, but it was enough to make Emily's heart leap. She looked down at Max, who was still watching Lily intently, and felt a surge of gratitude. "Good boy, Max," she whispered, reaching down to stroke his fur. Max wagged his tail in response, his eyes shining with quiet pride. The nursery was quiet now, the tension that had filled the room earlier replaced by a sense of calm. Emily leaned back in the rocking chair, her body finally relaxing as she listened to the sound of Max's steady breathing. For the first time in what felt like forever, she felt like she wasn't alone. Max wasn't just a pet. He was a partner, a source of comfort and strength in a time when she needed it most. As Lily's breathing evened out and she drifted into a deeper sleep, Emily closed her eyes, letting herself be carried by the quiet rhythm of the moment. Max remained by her side, his golden fur glowing softly in the dim light of the nursery. And for the first time in weeks, Emily felt a flicker of hope. The sun poured through the curtains of the nursery the next morning, casting soft beams of light over the crib. Emily sat on the floor with Lily, her legs stretched out in front of her as she tried to engage her baby with a colorful toy. A set of plastic keys dangled from her hand, their bright red and yellow surfaces catching the light. Lily's eyes followed the motion, her lips parting in what Emily liked to think was interest. But her hands and legs remained still, her body unable to respond. Emily's heart clenched. Every day felt like a battle, fighting against her own fears and the ache of helplessness. She knew progress would take time if it came at all, but there were moments, fleeting and fragile, when she allowed herself to hope. That tiny twitch of Lily's hand the night before had been one of those moments. Max padded into the room, his nails clicking softly on the hardwood floor. He carried one of his toys in his mouth, a slightly chewed-up stuffed rabbit. Emily glanced at him, a smile tugging at the corners of her lips despite her exhaustion. Max had been a different dog since the night before, quieter, more attuned to Lily's needs. It was as if he had found a purpose, one that transformed his usual puppy energy into something deeper. "Hey, buddy," Emily said, her voice soft. She reached out to scratch behind his ears as he dropped the toy at her feet. Max wagged his tail, his eyes flicking between her and Lily. Then, without hesitation, he lay down beside the baby, his body curving protectively around her. Emily watched in silence as Max rested his head near Lily's hand, his nose almost touching her tiny fingers. Lily's gaze shifted, her wide eyes fixing on the dog. Max didn't move. He stayed perfectly still, his golden fur shining in the morning light, his calm presence filling the room. Emily felt a lump rise in her throat. There was something so pure, so unspoken about the connection between them. Max didn't need words or gestures to communicate. His presence alone seemed to speak volumes. And then it happened. Lily's hand twitched, her fingers curling ever so slightly toward Max's fur. Emily froze, her breath catching in her throat. The motion was small, barely more than a flutter, but it was deliberate. Lily's tiny fingers brushed against Max's head, the soft touch almost imperceptible. "Max," as if sensing the significance of the moment, lifted his head slightly and nudged her hand with his nose. Tears welled up in Emily's eyes. She didn't dare move or speak, afraid of breaking the fragile magic of the moment. For weeks, she had waited for something, anything, that would show her that Lily was still reaching out to the world around her. And now, here it was, this tiny miracle unfolding before her eyes. "Jack," she called, her voice trembling with emotion. "Jack, come here." There was a clatter from the hallway as Jack hurried into the room, his tie half knotted around his neck. "What is it? What's wrong?" he asked, his voice tinged with alarm. Emily pointed toward the floor, her hand shaking slightly. "Look," she whispered, barely able to get the words out. She's moving." Jack's eyes widened as he took in the scene. He dropped to his knees beside Emily, his gaze fixed on Lily and Max. The baby's hand twitched again, her fingers curling around a tuft of Max's fur. It was a weak grip, but it was there. Jack let out a soft gasp, his hand reaching for Emily's. "She's doing it," he said, his voice filled with awe. "She's really doing it." Max, as if proud of his role in the moment, gave a small wag of his tail. He nudged Lily's hand again, his nose brushing against her fingers with the gentlest of motions. Lily let out a soft coo, her face lighting up in what could only be described as delight. For the rest of the day, Emily couldn't stop smiling. She held Lily close, marveling at every tiny movement, every small sign of progress. She knew the road ahead was still long, but this moment felt like a turning point. It was as if a door had opened, just a crack, allowing a sliver of light to shine through. Max's role in Lily's breakthrough didn't go unnoticed. Emily and Jack began to see him in a new light, not just as a pet, but as a vital part of their family. He seemed to take his responsibilities seriously, spending most of his time by Lily's side. When she fussed, he was the first to respond, his soft whines and nudges often calming her more effectively than Emily or Jack could. A week later, during one of Lily's therapy sessions, Max made another appearance. Emily had been trying to get Lily to reach for a brightly colored rattle, but the baby seemed uninterested. Max, who had been watching from the corner of the room, suddenly trotted over. He sniffed the rattle, then turned his attention to Lily. With a deliberate motion, he lay down beside her, his head resting near her hand. Lily's eyes lit up at the sight of him. Her fingers twitched, moving toward Max with more intent than Emily had seen before. The therapist, a kind woman named Sarah, leaned forward, her face lighting up with excitement. "Look at that," Sarah said, her voice filled with wonder. "She's reaching for him." Emily's heart swelled with pride. She had never imagined that Max would play such a pivotal role in Lily's therapy, but there was no denying the impact he was having. His presence seemed to bring out a side of Lily that nothing else could, a spark of curiosity, a drive to connect. Over the next few weeks, Lily's progress continued. Her movements were still small and tentative, but they were becoming more frequent. And through it all, Max remained by her side, his golden fur a constant source of comfort and encouragement. One evening, as Emily and Jack sat on the floor with Lily, watching her reach for Max with her tiny hand, Jack turned to his wife. "You know," he said, his voice soft, "I think Max was meant to be here. For her. For us." Emily nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "I think so too," she whispered. Max, as if understanding their words, wagged his tail and let out a happy bark. He nudged Lily's hand again, his warm nose brushing against her skin. And Lily, with a coo of delight, responded by curling her fingers around his fur. It wasn't just progress, it was a bond, a connection that went beyond words. And in that moment, Emily knew that Max wasn't just a dog. He was a healer, a protector, and a beacon of hope in their darkest days. The years began to pass in a blur of milestones, challenges, and small, hard-won victories. Lily's progress was slow but steady, a journey that often felt like a climb up a never-ending mountain. Each new twitch of her fingers, each attempt to move her arms or respond to therapy, was celebrated like a grand achievement. But through every moment, both triumphant and trying, Max was there, his golden fur a constant presence in their lives. By the time Lily was 2 years old, she had learned to sit up with support. Emily and Jack marveled at her determination, but it was Max who seemed to understand the depth of her struggle in a way no one else could. He would lie beside her during therapy sessions, his nose nudging her gently whenever she became frustrated, his wagging tail encouraging her to keep going. One morning, Emily found herself watching Lily and Max from the doorway of the living room. Lily was propped up on a cushioned mat, her small hands gripping a colorful toy. Max sat beside her, his head cocked as if he were studying her every move. Lily's brow furrowed in concentration as she tried to lift the toy, her arms trembling with effort. Max let out a low, encouraging whine, and Lily giggled, her frustration melting into delight. Emily smiled, her heart swelling with pride and gratitude. She had no doubt that Max had played an integral role in Lily's progress. He was more than just a companion. He was her cheerleader, her motivator, her best friend. And as Lily's bond with Max deepened, so did Emily and Jack's appreciation for the dog who had become the heart of their family. But life, as it often does, was not without its challenges. Lily's condition remained unpredictable, her progress marked by occasional setbacks. There were days when her body seemed unwilling to cooperate, her movements sluggish and her energy low. Those were the hardest days, when the weight of her diagnosis pressed down on the entire family like an invisible burden. On one such day, Emily sat on the couch, cradling a tearful Lily in her arms. Max lay at their feet, his head resting on his paws, his eyes filled with concern. Jack was at work, and the house felt too quiet, too heavy with the weight of Lily's struggles. Emily stroked her daughter's hair, whispering soothing words, but her own frustration and helplessness bubbled just beneath the surface. "I don't know what to do, Max," she admitted, her voice breaking. "I feel like I'm failing her." Max lifted his head, his ears perking up at the sound of her voice. He stood, stretched, and then gently nudged Emily's arm with his nose. She looked down at him, her tears blurring her vision. "What is it, boy?" she asked, her voice soft. Max didn't respond in the way a human would, but his actions spoke volumes. He climbed onto the couch, careful not to jostle Lily, and nestled himself beside them. His warm body pressed against Emily's side, his steady breathing a source of comfort. Lily's cries began to subside, her small hands reaching for Max's fur. The dog licked her fingers gently, eliciting a faint giggle from the toddler. Emily let out a shaky breath, her tears slowing. Max's presence had a way of grounding her, of reminding her that she wasn't alone in this journey. He had been there from the beginning, a silent witness to their struggles and triumphs. And in that moment, she realized that his love and loyalty were as much for her and Jack as they were for Lily. As Lily grew older, her bond with Max only deepened. By the time she was 4, she had made enough progress in her therapy to use a wheelchair for short periods. It was a milestone that brought tears of joy to Emily and Jack's eyes, but it was Max who seemed the most excited. He wagged his tail furiously as Lily explored the world from her new perspective, his enthusiasm infectious. One sunny afternoon, Emily took Lily and Max to the park. The wheelchair rolled smoothly over the paved paths, and Lily's laughter rang out as Max trotted beside her. The golden retriever seemed to know exactly how to match her pace, his movements careful and deliberate as if he were protecting her. "Faster, Mommy!" Lily squealed, her arms waving excitedly. Emily laughed, picking up her pace. Max bounded ahead, his tail wagging like a flag in the breeze. He stopped at the edge of the playground, looking back at Lily as if urging her to join him. "Go, Max!" Lily called, her voice filled with joy. Max barked in response, a happy, playful sound that made Lily giggle. Emily watched them with a mixture of pride and awe. In moments like these, it was easy to forget the challenges they faced. All she saw was her daughter, radiant with happiness, and the dog who had brought so much light into their lives. As the years went on, Max remained Lily's constant companion. He was there for her first attempts to push herself in her wheelchair, his encouragement as steady as ever. He was there during her therapy sessions, his presence a source of motivation. And he was there during the quiet moments, when Lily's struggles felt overwhelming, offering comfort in the way only he could. One evening, as the family gathered in the living room, Emily watched Lily and Max snuggled together on the couch. Lily's head rested against Max's side, her small hand buried in his fur. Jack sat beside them, his arm around Emily's shoulders, a contented smile on his face. "He's her miracle," Jack said softly, his voice filled with emotion. Emily nodded, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "And ours," she replied. The room was filled with a sense of peace, the kind that comes from knowing you're exactly where you're meant to be. Max let out a contented sigh, his eyes closing as Lily's breathing evened out, signaling that she had drifted off to sleep. As the sun set outside, casting a warm glow over the house, Emily felt a profound sense of gratitude. Max had been more than just a pet. He had been a healer, a protector, and a source of hope in their darkest moments. And as she watched him lying beside her daughter, his golden fur gleaming in the soft light, she knew that their bond was something extraordinary, something that would shape their lives forever.